Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Midwestern Archaeology Podcast. This is Lee Strange, your host, and today is the second part of the interview I recorded with Dr. Metin Eren last November of the Kent State Experimental Archaeology Lab. He's an absolute genius, and it was a great pleasure to interview him. So I hope you enjoy the rest of our conversation, and thank you for listening. One of the things that I have found very interesting about the papers that I've been looking at that you've published is one a few years ago on a apocryphal account of an Inuit man making a knife out of frozen feces. And I'm really curious about what that process was like and just kind of how that research question first came to you.
It's funny because I've worked all around the world, right? Dozens of countries. I've worked in the lower Paleolithic, middle, upper, all throughout North America, the Holocene.
Yep.
We've even done some historic stuff, right? Published like over 240 scholarly papers, right? But you make one knife out of your own frozen poop. And that's all anyone wants to talk about, the poop knife. So that was a study that we did in 2019. And it was account first published by Wade Davis, the famous ethnobotanist, Harvard-trained anthropologist. And he published that account in his book, 1996 book, Shadows in the Sun. And it's funny because I actually heard Wade Davis when he was doing the book tour for Shadows in the Sun in 1996, go on the Diane Rehm show. And in 1996, I would have been 14 years old.
Okay.
And he's told this account of this Inuit man who, in a survival situation, had to make a knife out of his own frozen feces, right? And I hear this story as a 14-year-old kid. I'm like, oh, that's awesome.
Wow.
Right? That's, amazing.
Yeah.
So that put anthropology like in my brain as a 14-year-old. And so little did I know, 20 years later, or no, 25 years later, I'd found and co-direct the Kent State Experimental Archaeology Lab where we can do any experiment we want. And so I had this idea. I was just curious, right? I mean, that's just where all this stuff comes from. Like, could you potentially make a knife out of actual frozen feces? So I went on a diet that was Arctic inspired, right? I
a lot of meat,
a lot of fish, fatty foods, and waited several days and produced the necessary raw materials. And we made the knives, and we did it in the wintertime. And also too, we had all IBC approvals.
Okay.
Also, the other thing I say is that this study was not funded by the U.S. taxpayer funding agency.
Yes,
I paid
this
for
was
everything myself.
Yeah.
You go onto Reddit and they're like, I hope this wasn't funded by No, it wasn't your tax dollar.
First mistake there going on Reddit.
Well, I've seen that comment on YouTube. No, for anyone listening to this podcast, the poop knife study was not funded with your tax dollars. It was paid by my own money. I bought the materials myself, and that was it. But we did the study in winter, and we got dry ice, which gets to negative 50 degrees centigrade. We really made these knives as best we could. And you can read the paper if you want. It's published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports. It's open access. But when we went to use these knives to cut, they just wouldn't cut.
Really?
I mean, at all. And the reason why, and it's obvious now in hindsight, is that the mere act of slicing, the friction between the blade and the material you're cutting creates heat, which melts the blade. So it just creates a different sort of streak.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And so this idea that this Inuit person used and made these knives to butcher a dog.
That's that's what I read is that.
Yeah.
Do you think it could have been a thrusting kind of a thing?
Well, so the story goes that this person butchered and disarticulated the dog such that they could turn the dog's rib cage into a sled, and they used the dog's hide to harness another dog. So this wasn't just murdering a dog. This was completely taking that dog apart through butchery. I'm very skeptical that that could have occurred, especially since like the flesh that we tried to cut was just pork that I bought from the supermarket. It was cold. There was no hair. If you're trying to disarticulate a recently killed dog, right? It would have been warm. Hair can do all sorts of nasty things to a blade. There's really no way that this could have worked.
So it's probably just a story made up to gross out.
Well, it's funny because that's the question. Where did this story come from, right? I don't know. We did a giant literature search trying to find the origin of this story. Now, Wade Davis says that this occurred potentially like maybe in the 70s, and it was the parents or grandparents. I'd have to take a look at the paper. The parents or grandparents of his ethnographic informant that did this, right? But what's interesting is there's actually a comic book called, I think it's like Forbidden Worlds or Forbidden Planet. I forget what it's called. That was published in 1978 that has a story of an Inuit man who makes a knife out of his own frozen feces, kills a dog, makes a sled out of it. I've got screenshots of this comic book.
I would love to see.
Yeah,
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
And so I just don't know, like, if like the origin of that story, this urban legend, came from that comic book. It's strange.
That would be, I mean, a little bit.
As far as I can tell, though, this poop knife story is not some sort of like long oral tradition legend passed down, right? Because we can find no evidence of it early on.
I was about to say, like, if there's no other examples of it anywhere else, any traces of it anywhere else in the world, of course it'd have to be in a colder climate, but
so who knows?
Who knows?
We won the Ig Nobel Prize for that. And the Ig Nobels are a long-standing award.
That's awesome.
Essentially the funniest science.
That's so cool.
And yeah, it was fun. It was neat. I mean, the other thing too is, we get comments on, taxpayer dollar. No. Okay. The other comment we often get is, how do these researchers, why did they do this? They're not taking their job seriously. I just want to say to these folks, like, I publish 15 to 20 papers a year.
You're firing on all cylinders.
Let me just have a little fun. Like, this was a fun thing to do.
I wasn't even thinking about this kind of afterlife of this paper that may have, you're still kind of dealing with.
Well, it's funny because you're the first person I've talked about it in a while. I was asked to go on another podcast. Actually, it would have been 3 different podcasts in the last, I think, 8 months, all wanting to talk about this paper.
Really?
And I've turned them all down.
And
they just wanted to hear the poop knife.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I'm just like,
enough.
Well, it's not only enough, but I don't like sort of just replaying the hits. I like the next thing and what are we going to do next and what are we going to work on next. And it was fun. And we learned some stuff and got a lot of positive media attention. But, I'm over it now.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Well, we can be over it right now too.
It's okay. Don't
worry. We'll set the poop knife down. So just to kind of move on with our discussion of developing technologies and how they can reflect societal changes. So you've done work on arrow tips and how there's a link between weapon form to warfare and social stress. And so kind of a more broad question build off of that is, how confident can we be of technological change reflecting these macro social processes? So we kind of talked about the Clovis point, reflecting this kind of lifestyle of highly mobile. And so when you're looking at these technologies and these points, do you see a reflection of human society or just a material reality that these people are in?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think the one thing to keep in mind is you always have to realize that when you're making a case for a particular selective factor influencing any attribute or adaptation, it's an inference, right? And it is incredibly tricky to find the evolutionary cause for any feature, right? And so you just have to make sure that when you publish a paper claiming this artifact looks this way for this reason, that then you have several paragraphs of caveats afterward, because you don't know. And so this is the crazy thing about sort of evolution and evolutionary theory as well, is it's so simple, but it is also endlessly complex and oftentimes always inferential, right? And so it's just, you have to really just get into literature. You brought up the warfare and points and stuff. We published a paper in, I think it was 2020, where we looked, and this was published in PLOS, we looked at late prehistoric triangular points and how their size influences penetration depth, right? And what we found in that paper was that experimentally, the smaller the point, the deeper the arrow will penetrate, right? Well, what's neat then is we looked at our experimental results, and then we looked at actual archaeological specimens, hundreds and hundreds of late prehistoric triangular points in Ohio. We found that the late prehistoric points get crazy small, like to an extreme extent. And so given the fact that we know that the smaller the point, the deeper it will penetrate, the fact that they get so small is interesting.
Yeah.
So we start to think and ask, well, what was going on socially or culturally that could have caused that extreme small size? Well, there's a couple things that are occurring. One is populations are increasing.
Yeah.
Right.
Agriculture.
And what we see is an increase in warfare, right? And if populations are increasing as well, we see there'd probably be increased competition for food resources, especially deer.
Yeah.
Right. So the point is that when you are out, trying to hunt, or you're in a warfare context, you want to make a kill, right? And so you're going to ensure you're going to make a kill by making your point as small as possible. So when it hits, whether the human or animal target, you will penetrate deeply, get that organ, and kill the victim, right? Or the animal. So that's a situation where we've got a pretty good story to explain why points get so small in the late prehistoric.
That's so interesting.
But that's not proof.
Yeah.
Right? Because you also can have things like evolutionary drift, where just through random events, random occurrences, points might be getting smaller, right? And it has nothing to do with smaller points being selected for a functional reason. Or maybe it's entirely some sort of what we call cultural bias. Maybe for some reason, the most prestigious flint knappers just individually liked to make small points. That was their individual preference.
Yeah.
Not for any functional reason. They just liked the way they looked. They thought they were cute, right? This is hypothetical.
Yeah.
But because they were the most prestigious flint knappers, everyone else who flint knapped adopted that small point because they want to emulate or imitate the prestigious person. That's called prestige bias. Well, that has nothing to do with function, right? The reason why points are getting small is because they're emulating this prestigious person. We can't disprove those biases, or we can't disprove cultural drift, which is why drift is always the null hypothesis. So even though we've got a good story for selection, why points are getting smaller, we could be wrong. And so this is why adaptations for the most part have to remain inferential.
What do veterans and archaeology have in common? More than you think. At ARI, we created Valor, the Veteran Archaeological Learning Opportunities and Research Program, to give veterans a new mission, uncovering the past while building their future. Through real-world excavations, lab work, and public interpretation, Valor provides hands-on training and experience that can lead to meaningful careers in archaeology and cultural resource management. Valor is more than just training. It's a chance to find community, purpose, and a new direction after service. Ready to dig in? Learn more at exploreari.org/valor and make archaeology your next adventure.
So this might be an odd tangent. So a lot of your work focuses on tool use from a very long time ago. And, as time goes on and human societies start to adopt agriculture, there's obviously a lot of societal and cultural change. And so that cultural bias, people start to do things for their own reasons, not necessarily for functional reasons. So religious, societal, just they like the way this small point looks. Is experimental archaeology, is it become harder to make these inferences the more recent in time you're talking? Does that make sense? Putting, you're testing a hypothesis, you're looking at these things like function and how well, a Clovis point penetrates in something, when they may have chosen that just because of the way it looks, I suppose.
Basically, I think what you're saying is, are there potentially more reasons for things to look a certain way post-agriculture?
Yes.
Whereas is it mostly function pre-agriculture?
Yes.
We can't say.
Yeah.
Right. And
right.
so this is the thing is, we can go even farther back in time, right?
Yeah.
Ashland hand axes.
Mm-hmm.
They get more symmetrical, maybe because symmetry reduces torque when you're using it to cut something. Maybe that's the functional reason why hand axes get more symmetrical over time. Or maybe there's some sort of aesthetic bias, whereas as Homo erectus is evolving and all this sort of stuff, there's just a preference for things that look more symmetrical, because all of us have a preference for symmetry, and this goes back to reproduction, all that sort of stuff, right? So it has nothing to do with function.
Mm-hmm.
And even though hand axes that are more symmetrical may incidentally function better, the reason why they're becoming symmetrical is not because of function, but because of an aesthetic bias that Homo erectus likes them to be symmetrical.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So no. Yeah. It's like, this is the thing is, like, once you start to think in evolutionary terms,
Yeah.
you realize that you got to be real careful with how you attribute features of artifacts to specific causes.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and that makes a lot of sense. It would be hard to just kind of attribute everything to being, they did this just because it was the most functional way of doing things. Yeah.
And I think it's funny because I think if you went back and you looked at the length of my papers, they are increasingly getting longer and longer and longer. And it's because you just start to realize the more you understand and read about evolutionary theory, the more we can't say
Yeah.
right about the past.
Yeah. Responsibly say.
Responsibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense. And so we actually, earlier this month, we had a phone call, just kind of preliminarily, where we were talking about equifinality. And that was something that I wanted to talk about with you, because I found myself thinking about it after the fact. It was very interesting. So could you explain what the equifinality problem is when you're conducting experiments, and kind of the criteria that future experiments can meet before they're used to make, claims like, unfounded claims?
Yes, for sure. So equifinality is when one result is achieved with two or more distinct processes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so one classic but very simple example, right? George Friesen, famous archaeologist at the University of Wyoming, he took Clovis points, replica Clovis points, to Zimbabwe, and he threw them at elephants. Now, these were dead elephants.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a call. He wasn't
sure.
He wasn't killing elephants. These were dead elephant carcasses.
Yeah.
And he got these transverse snaps. The Clovis points broke a certain way. And people will say, okay, well, if it breaks that way, it must be because people are hurling spears at these elephants.
Yeah.
Right. Well, my lab was fortunate in 2022, I think. And then the paper was published in 2024, but we did a collaboration with Meat Eater and Steve Ranella and all those guys, Clay Newcomb and Spencer and all those guys. They're great.
Yeah.
Where we butchered a bison with replica Clovis points.
Wow.
Through that butchery process, one of the points broke. And that break was an identical transverse snap to the one that George Friesen achieved by hurling a spear at the elephant, right? So in one situation, we've got a spear going at high speed, impacting the elephant and breaking a certain way. We get that same break through cutting butchery processes. That's equifinality. So when we now go to an archaeological site and we find a point in association with a mammoth, well, is it because that point was the murder weapon? Or was that broken point broken when they found an already dead mammoth and they scavenged it and butchered it and broke it in that way?
Yeah.
Right? We don't know. We just really don't have the resolution in the Paleolithic in particular, to make a lot of the claims that people have made in our
in the
field,
past.
right?
Yeah.
Because the other thing too to keep in mind, this is something I published in 2023, and I call it the poltergeist of the unpreserved, right?
Great name.
Thank you. Well, I had a different name for it. I forget what I called it. Someone else came up with something, and anyway,
it was workshop. Yeah. Sure.
But the poltergeist of the unpreserved, right? We do an experiment, right? And let's take the situation of George Friesen.
Yep.
He had the replica Clovis points, and they were attached to atlatl darts, and he had lashings, and he hafted them a certain way, and he threw them with his atlatl, right? Now, in that experiment, well, how realistic is it, right? We've never found a Clovis atlatl. We've never found lashings. We've never found adhesive. So we don't even know that Clovis folks used the atlatl. And if they did, we don't know the huge potential diversity of specifications across North America, right? So when we do a single experiment that halves Clovis points a certain way, and then we use them in one particular way, to then make conclusions about like the entire Clovis culture is pretty arrogant, unintentionally. But there's so much that we don't know, right? That you got to be real careful when you do an experiment. When we butchered the bison, so I'm taking a crack at my own work here, right? When we butchered that bison, we made Clovis points. Now, with those Clovis points, we compared them to archaeological Clovis points, and we showed that they were the same size and shape. But the handles that we made, we've never found a Clovis knife handle. We've never found lashings for a handle, adhesive, any of that stuff. So we did that experiment, but we don't even know that Clovis folks had handles of the same wood or style or morphology that we did. So how confident can we be that our results experimentally can be used to interpret Clovis butchery? We can't. There's just not enough that's preserved for us to say a lot, right? I mean, we don't even know that we're holding our knives the way a Clovis person.
Right.
So even if, let's say hypothetically, we found a Clovis knife archaeologically, and it was in pristine condition, we could identify the wood, we did the lashings, everything identical. Well, did they hold it the way we did in our experiment? Like that stuff doesn't preserve. So you have to just be very careful and very modest with what an experiment reveals about the past. And then increasingly, I'm starting to learn that experiments tell us more about what we can't say than what we can.
It's more about the parameters of what we can definitively say, as opposed to, well, it just kind of reflects a desire really to know more about the past, or at least to say more about the past, when really in reality, there's very little that these people from these times left us. And so their worlds are, it's just a very small data set, basically.
Yeah. And
people try and say a lot with a little, basically.
Yeah. And so it's very easy to be a good storyteller when you have a little bit of data. It's very hard to be a good scientist when you have a very little data, right? So, and this is another reason why I think my papers are increasingly getting longer and longer, is there's just so much out there that we don't know, that I really want to be as conservative as possible, because especially with social media and everything, and it's so easy to just say something, come up with a story for the quick media bomb.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially now, I think there's been an interest, like a more mainstream interest in our ancient humans, like especially from the Paleolithic and stuff like that. But I wanted to, so that does kind of touch on a question, and maybe the answer to this question you've already answered. But in your decades of work as an experimental archaeologist with your findings, how have you changed your approach? Is this, as you said, being more conservative and being more reserved in what your analysis is that how you would say you changed the most? Or
that's a good question. It's hard to evaluate. I think I've been lucky to have advisors that guided me the right way. If I think back to early drafts of some of my published papers. I'm sure that some of the conclusions that I had written went far beyond the data, right? But I was lucky that I always looked up to Dave Meltzer or Brian Redmond or Ofer Bar Yosef and they would keep me in bounds, right? And mind you, Dave Meltzer, Ofer, Brian Redmond, these are not experimental archaeologists, right? And that was really valuable. It's so important for people who do experiments to work with folks who don't do experiment. So they don't like fall in love with their own
ideas.
and
Yeah.
they don't fall in love with become enamored with their own skill. Because I'll tell you, Dave Meltzer did not give a crap that I was a good flint knapper, right? What he cared about was that we were coming up with really robust conclusions. So if I wrote a paper and I went too far in interpretation, you can guarantee he was going to pull me back. And, eventually you just get to a point where you start to pull yourself back, right? Now you have to be careful, right? You don't want to just not do anything. You don't want to be sort of like frozen. So you still have to, publish papers and write stuff, but you want to write it as carefully as possible.
Yeah. And do you think that that's been a problem with archaeology in the past of kind of a lot of interpretation,
archaeology, but then especially even experimental folk, they really like to think of themselves as replicating the past, and you're not. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So you throw an atlatl, right? Well, for all we know, ancient folks threw the atlatl while on their knees. We don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that's kind of an extreme example.
Yeah. But
the point is, they could have been doing stuff and using these technologies in ways that were not. And so you just have to, I think, have respect for just a vast amount of experience that just isn't preserved anymore. And the potential diversity of behaviors and cultures and ways of doing things may have existed at one point.
And so do you think it's important to not necessarily call out other experimental archaeologists if they are maybe taking too much, they're adding too much interpretation to their findings? Or do you think
that's what the peer-reviewed literature does?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
This is the point of publishing. And look, I said this earlier, right? Everything I do is also wrong. I mean, and so I think that's just the way science works. Like, people are going to do things better than I am now. I'm not publishing papers trying to come up with this one finding or whatever that's going to be cited for all time.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to do is move the football of discovery a little bit down the field. I'm not trying to score a touchdown. And so, so people have called me out on stuff. I call out other people. I mean, it's a team. And even if you've got rivals in the field, like, you make each other better through those debates, and it makes the field better. And I remember Todd Surabel at Wyoming and I were chatting over email once, and we made the analogy of how, like, the peer-reviewed literature is almost like it is like a stadium. So you get in there, you play hard, but then, like, when the game's over or the debate's over, right, you can go
fair match.
After. Yeah. And so, it's it is very much like sport.
That's interesting. Yeah, because what's interesting is ARI is like a public archaeology organization, and that's something that I find, as someone who talks to people of the public, they want you to say some really, they want you to tell a story, basically. And what's hard, and something that I try and make sure to restrain myself, is to not just take it and run and tell people what they want to hear, that we know all of these things and we believe all these things. So there's like a very fine balance between responsible teaching people responsibly and getting people engaged at the same time, because you want to be engaging, but you also want to be true at the same time.
Well, and it's funny because, like, the more I go on in my career, the more uncertain I become almost about everything. And so I think it's really important for us to tell the public that uncertainty is normal, and it's really important because uncertainty keeps you modest and honest. And so, I know they want a story, but maybe what we need to do is just get good at telling lots of stories and then saying, could be any of these.
Yeah.
Right. right?
Multiple choice
And we don't
question.
know.
Yeah.
And that's not to say we'll never know, but we don't know right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
It is very interesting. It's an ongoing kind of discussion, at least for me and my coworkers, to talk about it, because it's, we are trying to do research, but I would say our organization is mainly focused on getting just people engaged and also, aware that archaeology is done in the Midwest and stuff like that.
And that's a situation too where like the goals are slightly different.
Yeah,
and so
most definitely.
If you tell a story to pique some kid's interest, right? Awesome, right? You won a convert to archaeology.
Yes.
And so, obviously some of the things that I'm talking about now don't apply to all aspects of public archaeology. Or I'm really specifically talking about, the peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. So I did want to ask you about your paper that you published on atlatl use. So your findings were super interesting as it relates to how well men versus women are able to use it. So could you just kind of explain and go through your findings?
Yeah. So let me just tell you.
Super cool.
Yeah, it was really neat. Now that paper was driven by Dr. Michelle Beber, the co-director of the Kent State Experimental Archaeology Lab. That was her brainchild.
Yeah.
She spent months and months collecting data from lots and lots of people, huge sample size. And essentially what she found, and then myself and Briggs Buchanan, Rob Walker, and Dexter Zirkle, we did analysis and wrote the paper. But essentially what that paper shows is that when it comes to throwing the javelin, right, males can achieve much faster velocity than females can, right? But once the atlatl becomes employed for throwing darts, the differences between males and females start to disappear. It starts to equalize the sexes. And, the ultimate extreme case, if you take that sort of line of technology, is like with a gun today.
Yeah.
Whether a male or female pulls a trigger, that bullet is the same no matter what, right?
Right.
So really, you can almost think of the atlatl as the beginning of that process. And so really neat because it makes us think about this idea that only males hunted. Now, ethnographically, there are female hunter-gatherers out there that will go out and hunt, right?
Yeah.
Now, in the modern ethnographic record, it's predominantly males who do the hunting, right? But then that gets to this idea of whether or not the modern ethnographic record is truly representative of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of human behavioral diversity. I don't think it is. I think when we look at modern hunter-gatherers and ethnographic groups and even ethno-historic groups, it's probably pretty limited, small slice of all of the behaviors out there. So really the point of that paper wasn't that we know women hunted. What we're saying is that the idea that women did or didn't hunt needs to be an idea to be tested, not assumed one way or another. But still, that paper it's funny. When that paper came out, there are all the comments on, that's woke science.
Oh my God.
And it's like, this is an experiment that you could potentially just do in your backyard, right? Retest it. But rather than do that, folks just like to complain. And, because the complaining serves their immediate short-term goal. So it's whatever. Like, this is the thing, like the peer-reviewed scientific literature is one of the most enduring, immortal species has ever created. And so, we publish a paper. It doesn't matter what folks say now, where they say it. That paper is going to be there for the next generation to either support or show that, maybe it needs revision, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it was wrong. So I don't know. There's just a lot of
Absolutely. Well, I think what I found interesting the findings in the paper was that atlatl use may have, and of course this is just a hypothesis. It wasn't. I don't think the paper didn't claim that this was a certainty, but that during times where there may have been more scarcity, that an atlatl, the entire group of people using atlatls would have allowed the tribe and group to access everybody for that, for research
chances of success.
Yeah,
right? Because of the atlatl. So it's funny because I do know that there's some archaeologists out there who, they're gentle, or no, I shouldn't say gentle. They're fragile egos were insulted by this idea. But whatever. They can think what they want.
I thought when I read it, I shared it with everybody and at my organization, and I was just talking about it to everybody that would listen. It was very cool. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing. The great thing about evidence and data is you can create more of it.
yeah,
Right? If you
yeah,
wanna retest
exactly.
it, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It's always good, I think, especially to kind of challenge our own preconceptions about hunter-gatherers
Well,
and
and the
stuff like
thing,
that.
again, this gets back to the idea, and this is the point of that paper, that we don't know. Archaeology is not an observational science. Can't observe past people. So we have to be real careful with what we say we know versus really what we only, think we know.
Yeah.
And most of the time we don't know much.
Yeah. Yep, that's very true. So I wanted to also ask you about your kind of collaborations that you've also done with, avocational archaeologists and collectors. So what does that look like for you?
So we do a ton. We really feel it's important in this lab to work with avocational archaeologists, with collectors, because oftentimes those are the folks that are making the discoveries.
Oh yeah.
And the other thing too is those are the folks that are oftentimes curating artifact, right? Especially now, as a lot of museums are even contemplating getting rid of collections and stuff, right? You got to be careful. And so we don't want this stuff to disappear. And it's a lot of work to curate artifacts. So the fact that people do is a good thing. So what we do in this lab is when someone comes to us with a finding, oftentimes it's just a rock, right? But we've had lots of folks come to us and they've found some amazing things, right? We had a guy come to us once with 160 or 155 bifaces, and it turned out to be the Nelson cache, which we
Oh my
published.
God.
And it's potentially the largest Clovis cache ever found in North America.
Wow.
Right in Mount Vernon, Ohio.
Wow.
Now, when someone comes to us with a finding, whether it's an isolated Clovis point or a new site or a collection of things, right? We feel that they deserve credit, right, for their finding.
Mm.
And so we include them as co-authors
Wow.
on the published peer-reviewed paper.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what we find is because we do that, and that person has received both the credit and recognition for their discovery, and their name will be forever linked with their discovery. They're very willing then to donate to a public institution for everyone to be able to study. And so we find that by working with avocationals and with collectors, we're turning them into citizen scientists. And, all they want is to learn things, right? I mean, so many avocationals and collectors, they just want to know things about what they found. So when they donate stuff to a public institution, we then give it the 5-star treatment. For example, if someone brings in a Clovis point, we'll do geometric morphometrics and microanalysis, and we'll make professional illustrations and, get high-res images, and we'll do GIS analysis and geochemical analysis. And then they're like, holy crap, look at all this information we just learned, artifact. Then they tell their friends. And so
that's so cool.
Yeah, we've more than tripled the number of Clovis sites,
Wow.
Clovis sites in Ohio.
Wow.
By working with avocational archaeologists.
That's amazing.
It is. It's awesome. And so, for example, we've got a point here. This was actually by one of my students. This is a Clovis point.
Wow.
And we haven't analyzed this yet, but that was found in North Ridgeville, Ohio.
Oh my gosh.
And so,
beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the fact that we can now do geochemical analysis and we can do morphometrics, and we'll publish a small report on this, and the student will be a co-author.
That is so cool.
Right, on that paper. I mentioned the Nelson cache, and there's been other pretty cool discoveries. There's a guy named Dave Milkey, Watkins, Ohio.
Okay.
So right on the border of Indiana and Ohio, like the heart of the Midwest there. He came to us several years ago, and he had a Clovis site, and there's a number of amazing things about this site, which is called the Milkey site.
Okay.
It's named after him. And he was willing to donate all of the artifacts from this site to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And he was a co-author on the paper. Now, this site was cool for a number of reasons. But, as Clovis folks are moving across the continent, it's really important for them to maintain connections between different bands of maybe 25 to 30 people, right? Because you want to be able to exchange information with each other. You want to trade resources. But most importantly, you want to be able to exchange mates. So
DNA.
DNA,
Yeah.
so you don't succumb to inbreeding, because that's the fastest way to go to extinction. So it's really important that Clovis folks would meet up on the landscape. However, we really hadn't found many, if any, Clovis sites where it seemed to be a clear case where different Clovis bands were coming together, right?
Convergence.
Convergent, right? Now, at the Milky site, what's really cool is we did the geochemical analysis on the stone tools. Some of the stone tools are coming from the west. They're Burlington chert, west to east to Indiana or to Ohio at the Milky site. Some of the cherts are Wyandotte chert coming from the south. Some of the cherts are east, Flint Ridge, Upper Mercer, going east to west. We have like 5 or 6 different cherts coming from different directions, all converging at this one spot on the landscape. So the Milky site seems to be really one of these first Clovis sites where we can really infer pretty robust Clovis folks are coming, different Clovis folks are coming together, right, to form sort of a meta population. So really awesome. It was a site that really we couldn't have found without working with an avocational, Dave Milky. The other cool thing about that site, I mean, we published that paper in the Mid-Continental Journal Geology. What was really neat about that site was Dave found the base of a Clovis point in the 1970s at that site. When myself and Michelle Beber went out there to do some test excavations, Dave came out. His son Ryan also came out. And before we put any holes in the ground, we were kind of surveying the area. And Ryan, Dave Milky's son, picks up a fragment of a point, except it's a tip. And we were like, oh, cool. Right? How often do you get to find a Clovis point in the field?
Yeah.
So that was cool. Well, I bring that back to the lab, and I'm looking at this Clovis point tip that Ryan found. And I'm like, that looks awfully familiar. And I picked out the point base that Dave Milky, his dad, found in the 1970s. And
oh my God.
Together.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
Like 40 years apart, we found 2 pieces of the same Clovis point, father and son.
That's amazing.
Isn't that awesome?
That's so
really
cool.
Story.
That is.
But more recently, and we're about to submit this paper. This is unpublished. Joshua Fetter, Sugar Creek, Ohio. He was at a cabin with his family and was kind of bored. And he was walking along a pond it's part of a golf course, right? And as he's walking on this sediment that's been upturned and all this sort of stuff, he comes across some bifaces, right? Starts to dig. He finds 9 Adena bifaces.
Wow.
So, and it's a cache, and I've got it here. I'll show you some of it.
Yeah, I'd love to see. I would love to see.
Well, that was one of these crazy situations where Joshua's family happened to know the parents of one of our current grad students, Damon Mullen, who immediately told me and Michelle. And over the course of like a quick hour, we were then in contact with the golf course owner. And he said, look, you guys can come out and do some like salvage excavation, but you got to come tomorrow and you only have the morning.
Oh my God.
So we like got down there. It's a hefty drive down to Sugar Creek.
Sure.
And we went to the spot that Josh found these bifaces, and we did the best we could. We found 2 more. So it's a cache now of 11 bifaces, and they're beautiful. And we've done all sorts of geochemical analysis and morphometrics. And but that's the advantage of working with members of the public.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they're the front lines of discovery. Right?
Yeah. Well, and it's also like they have so much data to share. And ARI also does that as well. Oh my gosh. Wow.
So here, we'll get some of them out. But they're these beautiful Adena link
silhouettes,
and you can pick them up, obviously.
One of our archaeologists, Louis Hersner, would go crazy right now. He's a big fan of Adena.
So you are really the first.
That is so cool
to see these.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that is amazing.
They're pretty neat, and the flaking is beautiful.
Yeah. And this wouldn't have been, possible without avocational archaeologists. Yeah. Right. And are these relationships that you try and cultivate, or people just come in with their collections, or like
both? Right?
Okay.
It definitely helps that like I'm from here. So I speak Northeast Ohio.
Sure.
And Dr. Beber, Michelle, is from here. She's from Holmes County, which is like 45 minutes south of here. And so the fact that both of us are from Northeast Ohio, I don't know, we know people. And
those local connections are very key, because I find that avocational archaeologists can be a little bit wary of academic archaeologists, and oftentimes that feeling is mutual, unfortunately. But
to be honest, and to be fair to the avocationals,
yeah,
I do know some professionals that really kind of
scorn. They scorn them.
Right? I mean, they've got their fancy PhD.
Oh yeah.
And, I'm not going to interact with so-and-so or, but God, don't be a dick.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's just a good rule, I think.
We've got something we do called Artifact ID Day, where people, we like try and advertise it, and people from the areas collections, and that's how we are able to find some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen. Things that come out of the woodwork.
Well, what's amazing, right, is now that we have this, not only do we have new scientific evidence, but this is a published paper. And this is interacting with the public, and Josh is a co-author on the paper. And so it's
super cool. So was this in the past year, or when did you?
So now I feel bad because Josh actually made this discovery in 2021.
Okay.
And sometimes it just takes a while.
Yeah.
The analysis done.
Yeah.
So like between the geochem and all the morphometrics and stuff, we have all the pieces. Because the other part of this too is we actually have radiocarbon dates and all this sort of stuff. And it takes a while. And this is the other thing I'm finding too, like as my career goes on. We have lots and lots of projects, but each project also seems to take longer. And maybe I'd like to think that's because maybe I'm getting better at it to do and all this sort of stuff. But also there's just more science out there and more analyses and all this sort of stuff. So, it's 2025 now, so it's almost 2026. It's taken a while to analyze and write up these 11 bifaces. I think when you see the paper, you'll see like the science is worth it.
Yeah,
but
that's
like
awesome.
The Nelson Hash, right? That was published in 2021. That was brought to our attention, the artifacts, in 2017, I think, or 2016. So that also took like 5 years. Our bison butchery experiment we did that experiment in September of 2022 or 2021. I don't know. But then the paper came out in 2024. So that's the other thing too about experiments. If we just go back a little bit, so many experimental archaeologists today do what we call just weekend experiments. And
in their backyard.
Like that works once in a while.
Sure.
But like experimental archaeology has really matured. You really need to actually do a full research proposal and project, come up with hypotheses and predictions and all this sort of stuff. The days where you can just kind of go to a flint napping or some sort of atlatl throwing and collect data, I mean, those days are done.
Yeah.
You've really got to put in time and effort and to do the science proper.
That makes
the weekend
sense.
Experiment era is unfortunately
it's gone. Well, I mean, if it makes it more robust and the findings are more accurate, so it makes sense. It's looks like it's moving in the right direction.
I think so.
Do you have any kind of advice for, like a place that might be trying to get their, experimental lab up and running? I guess you just gave some great advice about being very rigorous when it comes to proposals and all that.
Yeah. So we need more experimental archaeologists.
Yeah.
We need more experimental labs. So this lab that we have at Kent State, there's really not a lab like it anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And what I often say though is imagine if you're a geneticist and there was only one genetics lab, right? That's not good science. You need lots of genetics labs to test and retest the findings from other labs, right? That's replication is how science really progresses.
Yeah.
And if this is the only experimental lab like this in North America, or at this point, even the world, like we haven't done our jobs. Now, it takes funding to create something like this, but we need more. And even if those other experimental archaeology labs, disprove our findings here, fine, that's awesome. The point is we need more of it. You can't have one lab in a field that does this sort of thing.
Yeah, because as you said, this lab was created in 2016, correct? And you and Dr. Pepper were kind of the people that founded this lab. And as a field in and of itself, experimental archaeology is kind of a concept that people, may have used or may have done experiments in the past, but when it comes to a dedicated lab, it's really kind of beginning, it seems like.
It is.
In a way.
So experimental archaeology has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's always kind of been on the periphery. And I think, in my opinion, that's because it wasn't being utilized the right way, right? We get to Binford's term of the egographic analogy. And too many experimental archaeologists, even today, they think that what they're doing is replicating the past, and no, that's not what they're doing. What you really should be aiming to do is creating models and tools to help us interpret the real evidence of the past, the stuff we dig up, archaeological record. And so, I think the reason why I was on the periphery was just we weren't doing it right. But we've worked really hard in this lab to do science the best we can. And I think more and more people see not only how productive experimental archaeology can be, but how cost effective it can be relative to field work, and how much we can learn and use it as a tool to help us interpret artifacts. So I think the future is bright.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's interesting is because you look at other places in the world, and there is kind of maybe a style of experimental archaeology, like in Europe, for example, that's kind of popular. You see people like recreating different, catapults or trebuchets or something like this, or recreating a castle using period accurate techniques and those processes. But when it comes to this kind of laboratory environment, it does seem very unique.
Yeah, and that's where that distinction between experimental archaeology and experiential archaeology comes in, right?
Sure.
Where you might be recreating something or doing something that is kind of like the generalized past, and just to help people visualize it. And that's so important, right, for public archaeology and outreach or stuff. But it's important that we distinguish between the two. And I think people are.
Yeah.
History isn't just in the books, it's in the soil, the stones, and the stories of your region. Join ARI's regional archaeological tours and explore hidden sites, historic landscapes, and the places where history happened. Led by real archaeologists filled with real discoveries. See the land like you've never seen it before. Check out our tour dates at exploreari.org.
Absolutely. So I want to respect your time. So I'll just ask a few more questions, and then we can wrap it up. So I was reading online in your bio on your website that you've got a patent under your belt. A couple. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are your patents in?
Yeah.
Just curious. Yeah.
Basically, the archaeological record is a 3 million year long source of technological and cultural ideas and innovation and all this sort of stuff. I've long thought that there's probably things that we can mine from the archaeological record, in the same way that biologists will mine adaptations of some sort of bioluminescence from a deep sea creature to make a better flashlight or whatever. And so we have patents on a couple styles of broadheads for bow hunters.
Oh,
and
awesome.
It's pretty neat.
That's really cool.
And so, and you can look up patents; they're freely available online and stuff. But new designs for broadheads we've been able to patent because they're just completely brand new, but they're sort of inspired by the archaeological record. But I just like to tinker and invent, and so I've got a couple other things that I'm working on that actually have nothing to do with archaeology.
Oh, cool.
That I will be trying to get patents on. It's just something. It's like a hobby.
What is that process like? I've never obviously made a patent before.
Yeah.
You have to
So for example, right? I've got an idea, and I'm not going to give away the specific idea
Of course.
because it's not quite ready yet. But
Sure.
like, so I love coffee,
Okay.
right? So I've been.
Thank you for the coffee, by the way.
Yeah, no
Got a
problem.
coffee.
But I love it. Like, it's my favorite thing. And I used to use a cafetiere, but for cholesterol reasons, I switched to the filter coffee.
Okay.
'cause we get
Yeah.
water and all-
Sure.
But I always hate it, like when you're pushing down the cafetiere, when like the coffee grounds get
Mhm.
stuck, and so it's like super hard to push plunger. And so, like, for example, like you just look at problems like that, and how can I come up with a way for the plunger not to get stuck, right? And so I have an idea.
Oh, awesome.
Right.
Okay.
So basically, trying to build a better cafetiere is one.
Amazing. Yeah, that's cool.
And so, and even if you don't get the patent, right, it's like fun just to think about how stuff works and the way stuff works, and so yeah.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
like a fun thing.
Well, that's cool. I was just curious about it.
It's
so
like it's a neat thing because like so much of archaeology and all those papers that you publish, and like they're not impacting society in like a real practical way, right? But something like a patent,
yeah.
that's an invention, and so it's a fun contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you always been a tinkering individual, like when you were a kid and a little?
I love Legos. I guess this is too why like I got into flint knapping. It's just fun to like fiddle with stuff,
Absolutely.
figure out how to make it or work it and stuff like that. So yeah, I've got a couple other things too that I'm working on. So
That's awesome. Yeah. So I also wanted to, in addition to, asking about your patents, just out of curiosity, where are you headed? So a place like the lab here is very prolific with its research. So where are you guys focusing, in the next year, or where are you hoping to kind of add more research and our understanding towards?
Yeah. I do a little bit of forensics as well. And so I've published 2 papers on bullet ricochet marks at shooting incidents, and then experimentally looking at whether or not you can identify the caliber of bullet based on the ricochet mark in concrete, right?
Yeah.
Which is a common substance in urban environment where shooting incidents occur a lot of times. So I've got a couple more papers on that I'm going to be doing.
Cool. Where do you test those?
So I do that work at the Riverside Range, which is of Pro Armament, which is the firearms shop in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio.
Okay.
And the guys at Pro Armament, they are true experts. Like they are amazing scientists and knowledgeable.
That's awesome.
Experts on firearms and the history of firearms and all that sort of stuff, and which also kind of ties back into flint knapping.
Yeah, projectiles.
Began with flintlock pistols and all that sort of stuff, and so I've got a couple papers on forensics I'm working on. I've got one giant paper that I'm working on. Actually, I probably shouldn't even say this because I'm not going to tell you anything about it.
Okay. But it's out
you'll
there.
know it when it comes.
Okay. All right.
It's something I've been working on for over a year now, and let's just say you'll know it when you see it.
Sure. Yeah. Stay tuned.
Yeah. We've got some work that we were in South Africa a couple years ago, and we've got a study where we're looking at the transition during the Middle Stone Age from quartzite tools to silkcrete tools.
Oh, you were showing me that over there. Yeah.
Over there. Yeah. I don't know. There's so many things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's hard to like, we've gotten to the point now too, where we have a little bit of a backlog. And so it's kind of like when we finish one paper, it's like, well, what do I just feel like working on next? And, I might be sick of the lower Paleolithic, so I'm going to do this thing on Clovis to that. So now I'm going to work on my forensic thing next. So yeah, there's a lot of different projects.
I was curious, and also I was talking with our head archaeologist, Rachel Sharkey, and she was curious about with a place like this, the kind of setup, the kind of operation you're running here. How do you manage all of these different projects? How divide your time between all of these things?
Yeah, well, I wake up at like 3:30 in the morning.
Holy cow!
And so, and I find, and I start to do that in grad school.
Wow.
I learned in grad school that period between like 3:30, 4 a.m. and 9 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
is a really great time to work
Mm.
because no one else is awake. You're not getting like emails or distractions or anything like that. My son, who's now 10, is still asleep.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the other thing too, is like, you also have to love to write.
Mm.
And, out of all this stuff, right, the experiments, the field work, survey, my favorite thing to do is write.
Mm.
And I think that's why I publish as many papers. It's not for any other reason than I like to write papers. Like, I like putting together arguments. I like thinking about stuff. I like crafting words and sentences together. And that's really my favorite thing out of all of this
That's awesome.
is writing research.
Sure, yeah.
And so that's the other way you manage all of this, is you just got to love it. And you got to love the publication part.
Yeah.
Which can be really frustrating when you've put years into a paper and some peer reviewer comes back and is like, oh, this is total crap.
Yeah.
And when it's not, right? I mean, I've never had a paper not get published, right? Maybe it's been bounced from a journal, grumpy reviewer, but it didn't publish somewhere else.
Wow.
And so I guess some resilience too.
Yeah, sure.
For example, right, in 2008, I had a paper that was pretty famous. We did the first large-scale quantitative comparison of cutting edge between Middle Paleolithic technologies versus Upper Paleolithic technologies. So very broadly, although kind of incorrect, Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens.
Okay,
right?
Sure.
And the idea was that Neanderthal-like technologies didn't produce as much cutting edge as Upper Paleolithic modern Homo sapien blade technologies.
Interesting.
Okay? Well, when we did the experiments, we showed that was incorrect, right? Middle Paleolithic technologies are just as efficient, if not more so, than Upper Paleolithic technologies for producing tools and cutting edge and all that sort of stuff. That paper not only was in the top 10 discoveries in science that year by Discover Magazine, it was featured on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Oh my God.
It was viral.
That's crazy.
At a time when it was kind of rare for things to go viral. It was 2008.
Archaeology. Especially archaeology.
That paper was rejected.
Cool. Wow.
By the Journal of Archaeological Science. And we knew it was good. And so we resubmitted it to the Journal of Human Evolution, and Bill Kimball, the late Bill Kimball, was the editor, and he instantly saw sort of what we had done and so we got the paper is accepted and published in JHE. So that's a paper that has made a lot of impact, has been cited hundreds of times, but it was rejected initially. And so just, you got to be resilient.
Yeah.
Right?
Thick skin.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think we can call it right here. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for coming. I'm really glad you got to. This has been a real pleasure. Very much.